way too many flag matches, way too many matches where U.S. talents will be booked against Canadian talents, especially for Canadian and U.S. tours, where they go back and forth from Canada to the U.S., and of course the mixed responses from the Canadian and the American fans. The American fans really came down hard on the Canadian fans. The Canadian fans equally responded, coming down just as hard or even harder on the American wrestlers, and there were riots and everything. I think they took that storyline a little bit too far, like they did the African American storyline against the Caucasian people. I mean, it was ridiculous seeing how the WWE would just blow these storylines out of proportion, so I don't condone what WWE did with Canadian wrestlers versus American wrestlers or blacks versus whites in WWE in the lateral part of the 1990s. But the thing is, I think that needs to really be put in the past and remain in the past, because what's happening here and now with Bret Hart, I give the wrestling fans all the credit in the world, because you guys are some of the smartest ever, because you didn't turn your back on Bret Hart. Bret Hart went away and stayed away for over 12 years, and he was wrestling on the independents, making appearances on the independents, signing autographs for different conventions and things, and here he comes back in 2010. You guys could have made the decision to turn your backs on Bret Hart and played Vince McMahon out to be the odds-on favorite to win in a match with Bret versus Vince McMahon 12 years in the making, but you didn't. You continued to support Bret Hart and show Bret Hart that same love and support that he had when he was the Pink and Black Attack, wrestling against the likes of Jean-Pierre Lafitte and people like Razor Ramon for the Intercontinental Championship, which, by the way, gave us some of Bret Hart's greatest matches. A great way of looking at Bret Hart, to go back and look at some of his first reigns as Intercontinental Champion against the likes of Mr. Perfect and Razor Ramon and Roddy Piper. The WrestleMania 8 Classic between Piper and Hart is really an exemplification of just how great of a wrestler Bret Hart is. He really is one of those technically sounded wrestlers, and I keep going back to the article that I read about Bret Hart versus Daniel Bryan, a dream match that if it ever were to have happened, the diversity that we would have seen in this match between two very technically sounded wrestlers. You had Daniel Bryan using his version of the LaBelle Lock, later renamed into the Yes Lock, and then you had Bret Hart with the Sharpshooter. So you had the Yes Lock versus the Sharpshooter, and just the diversity of how great of a match that would be. Also, there are a number of other dream matches that we have not seen discussed, like Bret Hart versus The Rock, which is one that I would have loved to have seen. If Bret Hart wouldn't have had that stroke he had in 1999-2000, I think Bret Hart would still be wrestling. I think that's something that you need to really highlight when talking about Bret Hart. If not for the stroke or this or that happening in his personal life and the animosity he's had with different companies he's worked for over the years, especially with how he left WWE for the rival organization World Championship Wrestling back in the day in the lateral part of the 1990s, and if not for his stroke in his match with Goldberg, which was a match that I did see, I think Bret Hart would still be creating with talents of today, and we probably would be seeing these matches with the likes of Bret Hart versus CM Punk, or Bret Hart versus Daniel Bryan, or Bret Hart versus Seth Rollins. I mean, putting him in the ring against The Miz is a far cry from what we could have seen Bret Hart do against the likes of someone like a Seth Rollins or a CM Punk or a Daniel Bryan, because a Daniel Bryan versus Bret Hart match in the Yes Lock versus the Sharpshooter is a really great way of putting on great wrestling to its finest, and I think that you couldn't have had Bret Hart booked against a better talent than the likes of Daniel Bryan. It's a real shame that wrestling fans are missing out on what I believe would have been a really incredible opportunity to see Bret Hart create with all of these wrestlers, but it amazes me how so many people have showed Bret Hart their support and seem to have never given up on Bret Hart. I mean, you have people like Roman Reigns, you have people like Daniel Bryan, you have people like the Ultimate Warriors family tweeting on Instagram, tweeting on Twitter, posting things on Facebook fan pages for Bret Hart out of support for him. I saw those with the screenshots WWE were throwing up. I even went out of my way to read some of the tweets, especially on Twitter, and some of the posts on Instagram and Facebook. I mean, it was amazing hearing the thoughts of people like Daniel Bryan, Roman Reigns, John Cena, Randy Orton, all going out to Bret Hart and his family, who are dealing with this very unfortunate circumstance. 99% surety of your future is one way of looking at it, but I mean 99% surety can be looked at in a lot of different ways too, because there is still that 1% looming over your head. Am I really going to get this far that I think I'm going to after successful surgery with cancer? Because yes, cancer can be removed so much, but there's always that chance that cancer could resurface, and no matter who it is, cancer doesn't care. It will come back when it wants to come back, when you least expect it to. So is Bret Hart really out of the woods? That's something to be wondered about, but we can only hope that he's out of the woods. I know there were a lot of stories about how different wrestlers over the years had beaten cancer. Roddy Piper, who just recently passed away last year, I believe it was, defeated cancer prior to his passing, and it was just unfortunate things played out and had to go the way they did for Roddy Piper. And now Bret Hart is inducted into that honorary Hall of Fame of people, professional wrestlers and athletes who have defeated cancer. I know from reading posts on Bret Hart's Facebook fan page, he said that he was really scared. It was one of the more terrifying experiences that he ever had to endure in his life because he was just so unsure. You know, he was in a time of darkness where there seemed to be no end to any of it, and there being no light at the end of the tunnel. But I think that his courage is something that he definitely needs to be given credit for, and something that he needs to be remembered for and congratulated for. That's why I'm taking a couple of minutes on my show to dedicate this to Bret Hart and just let people know how I really feel about a wrestler, you know, having to deal with the circumstances of cancer, because there are so many forms of cancer and how many different ways that we know cancer can affect us. And after being someone who was a victim of cancer in his life with different family members suffering through it, you know, I was never diagnosed with cancer. Hopefully I never will be, God forbid. But, you know, the effect that it can have on your family is just one thing that is very difficult to put into words. You know, just seeing your family, you know, having to deal with a very challenging ordeal is just something that just blows your mind every single time it happens. And take it from someone who it's happened to many times over the years. I know that a lot of family members actually have even had to deal with the same form of cancer that Bret Hart has, that I will not mention here at this point in time. But the thing is, it's very difficult to have to deal with, and because I know how difficult it is, that's why I'm going out of my way to comment very briefly here on Bret Hart's cancer. Now, I did 2 previous video blogs on my channel, for those of you that may want to know this, on Bret Hart's cancer when he was first diagnosed, and when they gave a little bit of an update on Bret Hart's future with the cancer, because I was really proud that Bret Hart had, you know, beaten cancer, but I never did go out of my way to offer a sincere congratulations to Bret Hart. So this is what this is, the 3rd and final video blog that I'll be throwing up on Bret Hart's cancer. Now, if I do get any more updates on the future of Bret Hart and what he's doing, you know, in terms of the independents or with WWE or another company like TNA even, I will throw it up on my Facebook page for you at HEW Entertainment. I will tweet about it for you on Twitter at Jonathan Clarke1, and I will post a 4th video blog if I have to go out of my way to do so on my YouTube channel. So I do invite you at Jonathan Clarke22 to subscribe, because you will hear all these video blogs I've already archived on Bret Hart and video blogs that I'll be throwing up on Bret Hart to come in the future. That's if we get any more updates. But I know Bret Hart's been keeping himself very busy for a number of years. You know, doing something with WWE is one way of looking at it, but he's been doing more, I think, on the outside of WWE when you talk about independent wrestling promotions. I know that he was here a while ago, and I was actually in the house about 15 years ago or more when Bret Hart had his final match here in Newfoundland with himself and Owen Hart teaming up against Austin and Mick Foley in an incredible tag team match that so many people still resonate with today and to go back and talk about, because it was one of Bret Hart's best tag team matches. And I think on that whole tour, teaming with Owen Hart was an experience in its own, because of what happened to Owen Hart by 1999, just 2 years before Owen Hart's tragic death in Kentucky. And I remember seeing that too on May 23rd, 1999. So I think that the Hart family have affected us all in so many different ways, and this is just another way of us perceiving and choosing to look at the Hart family. But I mean, so much courage coming from Bret Hart, you know, something that I think cannot go on without any recognition, and I think that it's justifiable for me to come on here and say, you know, congratulations to Bret Hart having to deal with this and overcoming it in the way that he has, because there was the chance that he wasn't going to be able to overcome it in the way that he did. And now he's saying he's 99% sure, with posts on Facebook, tweets on Twitter, and posts on Instagram. For those of you that have the app, Bret Hart's saying he's 99% sure that he's going to have a very fulfilled life, and he's going to go on with life in ways that he had originally planned to do so before the cancer befell him the way that it did. And I do wish Bret Hart all the best in the very near future, but looks to be very promising for someone who obviously was and always will be the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. And there's really no other way of looking at it. I may never have been the biggest Bret Hart fan, and that's something that I've always prided myself on, being very honest with the people who subscribe to my show. I would never lie to anybody about how I felt about a certain wrestler. If I ever felt hard on a certain wrestler, I would always give them a very difficult time, and Bret Hart was no exception. I always chose to give Bret Hart a very difficult time, and that seemed to be a very surprising thing to have to hear from me from a lot of Canadian wrestling fans, because I am a Canadian myself, and you would think that I would like Bret Hart. And so many people have said to me in everyday conversations, you would think you would go out of your way to give Bret Hart more credit than what you do, but I can't, because I was never the biggest Bret Hart fan. But even though I was never the biggest Bret Hart fan, I take great pride in congratulating Bret Hart with his victory over cancer, and I do wish Bret all the best in the very near future for someone who arguably is one of the best there is, best there was, and the best there ever will be, and someone who will never be forgotten anytime soon. I'm your host, Jonathan Clarke, saying congratulations to Bret Hitman Hart, and I will talk to you again next week. Like what you hear? Tell us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.